Hello and welcome, Literary Gladiators. I'm Jay Hennicke, and I'm going to talk about Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. And I think the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to talk about it for like 15 minutes because it's way too large to entirely discuss in this amount of time. So I'm pretty much going to focus on Raskolnikov as a character and his dilemmas and potential solutions. It has been a long time since I read this, so there are going to be some plot points that are hopefully kind of minor that I won't remember, and then a few that are major that I won't remember, and that's kind of good because then hopefully you'll go and actually read the book because it's worth the experience of reading Crime and Punishment on your own without, the cliff notes and all of that. But so hopefully I give you more of like a background that will help you read and enjoy and understand the text rather than instead of reading and understanding the text. So Crime and Punishment follows the main character Raskolnikov, and I'll try to stick to main names, and you'll figure out the rest of what I mean when you read the book. So Raskolnikov is in a sense the main character. I believe the narrator is third person omniscient, but you're mostly following Raskolnikov throughout the novel, and it opens that he is in the city of St. Petersburg. He moved there from some rural farm, whatever, in Russia, and was accepted to go and attend a university. And he is now an ex-student, and that's one of the points. I don't remember exactly why he's an ex-student, but he's an ex-student of the university, or a university in St. Petersburg. So he is this intelligent guy, and I'm pretty sure he was there to study philosophy. And if he wasn't there specifically to study philosophy, philosophy is one of his major interests. And so as a student of philosophy, he develops this theory of his that there are people who can just do whatever they want morally, I guess we'll have to play around with this idea. So he calls these people Napoleons, and the idea is he sees in history, and I suppose in his reality of St. Petersburg, these people who do, in a sense, whatever they want, and they don't feel bad about it. In fact, the argument that he makes suggests that not only do these people not feel bad about it, but they might actually have, in reality, the right to do, in a sense, it's whatever they want. He says part of his argument seems to suggest that there is this greater good that they're trying to achieve, but we'll play around with what makes sense and what doesn't make sense of the argument that he's trying to present and the dilemma of the novel, and possible repercussions of assumptions and reality as it seems to be. So that's his theory, Napoleons. And he decides to test this theory. He doesn't just say that there are these people. He says that you can turn yourself into one of these people. And that's his experiment. So we can think of the novel, in a sense, as if Dostoevsky says, I have this thought experiment that I want to conduct. And so I'm going to write a novel about a character who actually conducts the thought experiment of, I can turn myself into a Napoleon, psychologically, and we'll say emotionally. That is not exactly, maybe that's the synthesis. Psychology is the synthesis of the two opposing forces, or what is set as opposing forces in this novel, which is emotion versus logic. I guess that's one way to put this dichotomous relationship, these opposing forces of say, what happens if logic goes in this direction and this direction cuts off emotion. And if we keep following logic without emotion as any part of the argument, we can get to the point that we can say, well, then we can just do whatever we want and we won't feel bad about it if we just only don't have emotion. And so Raskolnikov is, in a sense, testing this theory. That's one way to look at the theory of being a Napoleon, that you can just turn yourself into a person who can, say, murder somebody. And that's what he decides to do. He says, I'm going to just murder somebody to test this theory that I have about being able to just do what I want because I think it's right. And I mean, maybe he has a good argument. Maybe he has a flawed argument. We'll say, let's stick with the plot first. The plot says he goes and does this, and he ends up killing this woman. She's a money lender, or so, she's a pawn broker, whatever. So she exchanges jewelry for money and then re-exchanges it at like interest or something like that. And you know, say what you want about these types of people. He decides that she is a louse, like lice, like a parasite on society, and therefore expendable, undesirable, justified in like, I'll just go and kill her. This is the argument that he has made in his head. And if we stop right there and he just does this and is like, cool, well, then the book ends. Clearly then that's not what happens, because this murder happens within like the first chapter, right? Basically, I've talked for 7 minutes and I don't think I've gotten past like the first almost 20, 30, 40 pages, and it's almost like a 300-page book. And so the rest of this book is dealing with this character's conflict as a consequence of what he just did to try to prove this theory that he has. And so his reaction is this horrible psychosomatic state of basically guilt is one way to, I mean, this is all interpretation, so hashtag I might be wrong about any of this, but one way to think about this is that he is having a psychosomatic reaction, that he feels guilt in his mind, and therefore he is feeling ill in his body. And one symptom of this, or consequence, however you want to put it, is that he's not really eating. So he's kind of causing it himself, but the indication, the implication in the novel is that it's like a consequence of his psychological state that is influencing his physical state. And so a lot of this is just his physical torment of what he did and how he feels about it. And throughout the novel, right, so you think, okay, this guy is trying to turn himself into a Napoleon who just does whatever he wants, but you have examples of, say, compassionate behavior, non-dictatorial behavior from Raskolnikov throughout the entire novel, right? So he's even considerate about the murder. He wants to murder someone who is bad, right? That he's removing this bad element from society. He's trying to be conscientious, not just about not being caught, but this woman he decides to murder has a sister, and he tries to plan around the sister and fails and actually ends up murdering the sister too. I want to kind of put that beside the point. It's almost like added on top. I'm hoping, or I believe, that the argument suggests that he would have this psychosomatic reaction anyway, and it's not just, oh, well, this additional thing happened that he couldn't control, and then it's like chance that ruins his argument. I don't think that's what Dostoyevsky is saying, is that like he accidentally did something that he didn't want to do and therefore felt bad about that. I don't think that's the argument, although that might fit in there a little bit. I think there's a much bigger argument that suggests he feels guilt and it is expressing itself physically in like illness. So he goes through this game of trying to like avoid being caught, right? There's a detective, so it's kind of like a detective novel, and there's a lot going on there that is not part of this discussion. And so, look for that. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. But within Raskolnikov, there's kind of this like dichotomy of, try not to be caught, but I feel guilt about this. And what ends up breaking him in a sense, what gets him to finally cross over from I did this to I admit that I did this, I confess to this, I confess to feeling bad about this, is well, I guess we'll say it's twofold. Maybe we can't point to one. Maybe one might not have been enough, but two things happen. One is he falls in love with a woman. I mean, do I need? Can I just stop there? Is that enough to make you not want to murder people and try to prove this argument about like I can just do whatever I want and not feel bad about it? It's like, yeah, I fell in love, and then that changed my mind about my argument. Emotion came back, and now I no longer want to make the argument of let's try to be Napoleons. And then, so that's the first thing. He falls in love with a girl. There's a lot going on with this character. I'm just going to fast forward. Is like they fall in love, in a sense, in a weird 1860s Russian sense. Like, yes, they fall in like real love, and it's cool for them, and it guides a lot of the story. And kind of the end of the story is really important about like their relationship with each other, and how lasting it is through like many years of prison for this character, because he, murdered somebody and then confessed to it. So the second thing that happens is this character's mother and sister visit him from rural 1860s Russia, which is not necessarily all-encompassingly entirely wholesome, but you get this impression that there's this another version of a dichotomy going on here, rural versus urban. I don't want to go too long into this, but say pay attention to an argument being made about the difference between like not necessarily just ethics if you're in a rural environment, but we'll say like potential influence rural environment can have on behavior, or potential like influence of logic and logistics rather than humanistic approaches to arguments about morality and reality, and then versus say urban, and especially in like 1860s Russia, where you have industrial revolution happening, and then not just industrial revolution, but in a sense industrial fast forward happening, going from say rural to industrial really quickly rather than over a few hundred-year process. And then maybe say parallels now, maybe not parallels now, between going from industrial to technological, and then the fast forward process would be going from say rural to technological, or even just urban to technological is enough of a jump. But the idea here is influences of environment on potential argument, and they come to the city. So they come to the city, and they, in a sense, I guess you can say, like bring him back to that root. They reignite in him these emotions, feelings. Like we don't even need to define them, just any at all, because we can make an argument that potentially what happened, and this all happens before the novel starts, is that he's this good boy from the country, and he's smart, whatever that means in 1860s rural Russia. So he goes to study at a university, and he uses logic, because that's say an argument being made about this book is like enlightenment says logic, and now we have not just on an individual level, not just on a social level, but on like a universal level of argument. Is logic better than emotion? Are they different? Do they lead to different conclusions? Can we really separate them? Part of the argument of this novel seems that for at least this character, he could not separate logic from emotion. And when he did, he ran himself into what is now a popular term of cognitive dissonance, that he tried to enforce on reality something that didn't actually accord with reality, and the idea that he could not turn himself into a Napoleon. Now here's where questions still exist. Did the experiment fail just because it was him? Right? Is it just Raskolnikov? To what extent is Raskolnikov supposed to be an example of all human beings? Which maybe that's the argument, right? Maybe Dostoevsky really does mean, hey, look, all human beings really need and feel this connection of emotion with logic, or just have emotion, or we'll say are not Napoleons. We do have a small problem, and that's that Napoleon really existed. So we kind of have two conclusions from that, which is, yes, some people are Napoleons, but we could maybe argue that they just know this. And if you have to try to make a logical argument of like, I think I can make myself into a Napoleon when I'm pretty sure I'm not one yet, then don't try that in reality, right? That's a thought experiment. That's the Dostoevsky experiment, which is, let's write a book about a person who really tries this, and imagine how would I feel if I just like planned this murder and then did it, and then this accident happened, and all of this stuff is happening now. Where am I mentally? Okay, well, at least I feel guilty about this. So maybe that's an argument about all of us, that we would all feel this guilt. And now we don't have to conduct the in reality experiment, the in concreto experiment, right? This does not have to be a posteriori experiential knowledge for us. We can just accept that, hey, you know, there are certain actions that we can just not have to worry about trying to do, because we are pretty sure we're going to feel bad about it afterwards. So that's where we are with that one perspective of that we have to deal with the fact that Napoleons existed. And I guess the other argument you can make is that, well, Napoleon was really kind of like Raskolnikov, that he really had all of these feelings, and when you look back on historical Napoleons, they're really these idealized caricatures of like logic or force, or whatever you want to say is the prime motivation of a Napoleon. And maybe they didn't really exist, but we can imagine someone like that existing, and then you're like, well, maybe he really didn't feel bad about anything he did because he was Napoleon, and that's just like the way some people are, or can be, or can make themselves be. And maybe that's just a mistake. Maybe the argument is that, no, we're really Raskolnikovs, and we should not try to go outside of our scope of like personal morality at the very least. And then some people just have different limits of their own morality, is one way to put it. So, you know, potentially there's this relative morality, but I don't think that's exactly the argument being made here. But, you know, let's just throw out all of the ideas, let you read it, and ideally you'll come out and say, wow, that was a really intense journey through this guy's psyche, or, you know, a journey, a psychological journey through this kind of argument and playing with these ideas, and then say, ask the question, like, where does the guilt come from? And if you do that and read this book, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed listening for about 20 minutes. There's much more that I didn't discuss, so read it, and thanks for having me, and take care.